You have no idea how happy and great I feel to be here today, right? It brings many happy memories. My name is Felix Matos Rodriguez. I am a professor of history at Queens College, currently on leave, serving as the chancellor of the City University of New York, and I'm delighted to be here at Queens College for this fantastic event. Let me give my greetings and make sure that I have permission to do this from your president, President Frank Wu. Thank you, Frank, for your leadership and all your incredible work here at Queens. And this is a happy occasion and a historic occasion, I am told. I think it's the first time in any of our CUNY campuses where we've had together both the National Poet Laureate and the State Poet Laureate, right? So we have two more events planned. The next two would be having, in addition to that, the City Poet Laureate, right, with the two of them for another event, and then the County Poet Laureate to be able to do the entire sort of round of poetry. But the great thing is about the power of poetry here in Queens. It's a distinct honor for me and for all of us, and I know that you've had them for part of the day, engaging with the students and with the faculty. Our U.S. Poet Laureate, Arthur Sze, thank you so much for being with us here today. And we're reflecting, he was telling me that he was born here in New York and he grew up here in Flushing, as he was talking about how wonderful it felt to be here in our Queens College campus, where it's reflective of all the incredible diversity of the borough of Queens and of New York City, and particularly also the linguistic diversity that we have in our city. So delighted, and I think I couldn't think of a better place other than Queens College to be having this event here today. I am also very excited that he's here because one of the anchors of the many wonderful academic programs here at Queens College has been the whole work on creative writing and the work in translation. It's been a signature of our MFA program. When I was here on campus, I was able to benefit from many wonderful speakers, many great students who were part of that program. So it seems fitting also to be able to have him here today. Obviously, we all know that magic happens because we have some wonderful people that work magic in our campus, right? And one is our very own Poet Laureate, distinguished professor, our very own Kimiko Hahn. And I have the distinct honor to introduce her today, and then she'll be guiding us with the rest of the program for the rest of the day. We are going to do an experiment. We're going to trade places because she is currently the chancellor, right, of the Academy of American Poets, right? So we have agreed that we're going to do a 6-month exchange, chancellor to chancellor. I don't know how well received I'll be among the poets. I have no doubt the university will welcome Kimiko with open arms in the role as chancellor, right? So we'll see how that goes. But obviously, we know her as an incredible creative soul, 11 books of poetry that have been produced by her, many awards, the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize for Lifetime Achievement, and many things that we can say. But I think for those of us here at the Queens College community who have the joy of having seen her faculty for many decades, she asked me not to say how many years she's been in the faculty here at Queens. I'm going to honor that. But we know how many of our academic programs in the MFA, in the English department, how many of those wonderful things and that legacy have Kimiko sort of fingerprints all over them. What a wonderful colleague she is. What a great mentor of our students here in the faculty. So it is a great pleasure for me to introduce your very own New York State Poet Laureate, Distinguished Professor at Queens College, Kimiko Hahn.
There are a lot of people here. Thank you so much, especially on such a cold evening. Thank you, Chancellor Matos Rodriguez, and welcome home to Queens College. Many of us call our Chancellor Phalo because he was our college president, and during his tenure here, creative writing was in high gear. Poetry, prose, and translation thrived. And now with President Frank Wu, Provost Patricia Price, Dean Simone Yearwood, and Communication Director Jay Hirschison, creative writing is thriving on campus, even as there are outside forces that would dim the lights on the arts and humanities. So thank you all for your support. Thank you, too, to the Library of Congress, and the head of poetry and literature, Rob Casper, who is my longtime friend in the trenches of art advocacy. Yes, my name is Kimiko Hahn. I am poet. I am the granddaughter of immigrants, and it is very important for you to know that about me. I'm a literary citizen and professor here in our distinguished English department. I count myself fortunate to have colleagues Anne-Marie Drury, Jason Tuga, Nicole Cooley, who, while they're not producing their own marvelous creative work, are brilliant professors and guiding administrative spotlights on campus. Queens College is one of the few Master of Arts programs in the country that recognizes translation as an essential and forward-looking art. Our cohort knows the power of art. It is transformative. Translation is transformative for the individual and for the culture. How do we, as writers and professors, obtain such transformative energies? The answer is simple. From our powerfully vibrant students. To our students, thank you. And this thread of thanks leads me naturally to Arthur Sze, also a dear friend, extraordinary poet, son of immigrants, and our new United States Poet Laureate. To become a Poet Laureate, we can assume an extraordinary measure of craft and more, of emotion, ideas, integrity. Arthur has garnered nearly all there is to be awarded in the United States. His 12 books of poetry and 2 of translation have received, for example, the 2025 Bollingen Prize for American Poetry for Lifetime Achievement, the National Book Award for Poetry, and Pulitzer finalist. Over a dozen honors include the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize for Lifetime Achievement. By the way, when there's a prize that says Lifetime Achievement, it means thank you for what you've done and keep going. So it doesn't mean like that's it. Very strange phrasing. He's also received a Guggenheim Fellowship, Jackson Poetry Prize from Poets and Writers, 2024 Rebecca Johnson Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry from the Library of Congress, and this is just to name a few, a handful. Before and while garnering these awards, Arthur was a teacher, administrator, and organizer at the Institute of American Indian Arts in New Mexico. He is now Professor Emeritus. But none of these accolades would mean very much if his work didn't, as the cliche goes, speak for itself. Poetry that is extraordinary for its breadth of experimentation and kindness. you will find he looks to the natural world with a kind of pause, stays, brings what he finds in those pauses to us. Current events, history, personal joy, tumult. Could I have known decades ago that we would find ourselves here? Not really, and absolutely yes. In the program you have, there are 2 poems that are from another program that we were a part of in 1998, which wasn't the first program we were in together, by the way. So I'm going to read this poem of mine and then welcome Arthur to the stage. In childhood, things don't die or remain damaged, but return. Stumps grow back hands, a head reconnects to a neck, a whole corpse rises blushing and newly elastic. Later, this vision is not true. The grandmother remains dead, not hibernating in a wolf's belly. Or the blue parakeet does not return from the little grave in the fern garden, though one may wake in the morning thinking mother's call is the bird. Or maybe the bird is with grandmother inside light. Or grandmother was the bird and is now the dog, gnawing on the chair leg. Where do the gone things go when the child is old enough to walk herself to school, her playmates already pumping so high the swing, hiccups? Please welcome the United States Poet Laureate Arthur Sze.
Thank you, Kimiko, and thank you all for coming on such a cold evening. What a great pleasure to be here as the new U.S. Poet Laureate. It's a pleasure and honor to launch my laureateship here. And my signature project has to do with poetry and translation. I'm going to just step over here and read from this mic. So when Kimiko and I read together at the DIA Center for the Arts many years ago, these were our 2 poems, and it's a nice reunion to have these tonight. Before sunrise, the myriad unfolds from a progression of strokes. 1, ice, corpse, hair, jade, tiger. Unlocking a gate along a barbed wire fence, I noticed beer cans and branches in the acequia. There are no white pear blossoms by the gate, no red poppies blooming in the yard, no Lepiota nauquina clustered by the walk, but bean, gold. There's the intricacy of a moment when wind, 3-legged incense cauldron. I begin to walk through a field with cow pies toward the Powaki River, sense deer, yellow, rat. I step through water, go up the arroyo, find a single magpie feather. This is a time when blood in my piss, ache in my nose and teeth. I sense tortoise, flute, where there is no sound. Wake to human bones carved and strung into a loose apron. I'm going to begin this evening just with some remarks about translation. So let me just lay them out. They're not in a linear or progressive order, but as part of my signature project, assembling a book that I hope can be used in classrooms. There are going to be 23 poems from 14 different languages. And instead of chapters, the book is laid out in zones because I want each zone to be rooted in a poem by a particular language and time. And rather than for instance, present a poem in Chinese and one translation in English, I open by presenting 3 different translations of the same poem from the Chinese and talk about how each translator found something of value to carry over, to bring over into English. So I see it as very much of a hands-on guide. After I talk about those 3 translations, and I provide a crib where I provide words in English and the sounds under each Chinese character, I invite a reader to make their own translation. The languages include Navajo. I have a 2-word, untranslatable compound word in Navajo, Hosho and Hoxo, and it's a visual poem where Hosho is at an angle and Hoxo, imbalance, is turned upside down. Hosho means balance, and they're connected and tilted. So I talk about making visual poems, how a poem can't be translated, how the Navajo language is built around the verb to go, whereas English is built around the verb to be. So through the whole book, it's really, I see it as a kind of journey in poetry and poetics, and hopefully as a source book where we can widen and deepen the appreciation of poetry. You can appreciate poetry better by making translations. And toward the end of the book, I invite readers to write the poem they could only have written after having made a translation. So I see the book as having multiple uses. And in the introduction, these are just some phrases that I thought were important to consider. Translation is a deeply humanizing endeavor. It makes the ancient contemporary, the foreign accessible, and the emotional, intellectual, and spiritual music of the human interior universal. Translation is everywhere. English, a composite and growing language, has been enriched and strengthened over time by accruals from languages across the world. The word translate comes from Old French, which itself comes from the Latin, translate meaning to bring over, carry over. Translation practice is a vehicle to develop our own poetry, and to write poetry with its sonnets and sestinas, its haikus and ghazals, all carried over into English from other languages, is to awaken to the possibilities and expand the resources of our shared language. Translation builds bridges and makes connections. This evening is titled Words Bridging Worlds. And the more we give, the more everyone has. Great poetry ignites and reignites our shared humanity over time. And the transient worlds of poetry in translation, because language is always evolving, speech patterns, syntax, vocabulary always shifting, translations are by nature ephemeral, and they play a vital role in bringing us together. This afternoon, I had the pleasure of working with some undergraduate students, and I presented a crib of a poem by Tao Chen, and the poem was written at about 418 Common Era. The poem is called Drinking Wine, and I gave the students the Chinese characters with the phonetics and clusters of words under each Chinese character. I like to think of a Chinese character as having a field of energy, that you can't just put one word in English under a Chinese character and say this is equivalent to that. And the students worked out their different translations, and I wanted to start by sharing my own. Drinking wine. I built my house near where others live, and yet without noise of horse or carriage. You ask, how can this be? A distant mind leaves the earth around it. I pick chrysanthemums below the eastern fence, then gaze at mountains to the south. The mountain air is fine at sunset, Flying birds go back in flocks. In this, there is a truth. I wish to tell you, but lose the words. In the Chinese, there are 5 characters to a line, and you read the first 2 and you pause, and then you read the next 3. And in this particular translation, in the third and the last lines, I inserted commas because I wanted those pauses, those silences, to just create a different tension and rhythm. You ask, how can this be? And that pause is where the silence is in the Chinese. And in the very last line, I wish to tell you, but lose the words. So one of the things I like to do as a translator is play around with not just the sound, but the rhythm and the tension by inserting silences at different places inside of the poetic line. And when I mentioned how poetry can be a source book for our own poems, it's really decades later that I thought of writing. I was working on my latest book, Into the Hush, and I was trying to use different forms. I wrote my first suihitsu, and we'll talk about that later. I wrote my first pantoum, and I was thinking of writing a letter poem, and I thought, who would I write a poem in the form of a letter to? And I thought, what if I take the ending of a Tao Chen poem and write it to him, Letter to Tao Chen. I wish to tell you, but lose the words. More than a millennium later, on another continent, in another language, I know adversity strengthened you. Today, we possess antibiotics, cars, cell phones. Scientists use infrared scanners. Check a wildfire that has charred 341,735 acres. When you picked chrysanthemums by the bamboo fence to the east, then gazed at mountains to the south, at birds homing at sunset, you turned in 3 directions, centering yourself. Though you omitted north, I posit mortality as you sipped wine. Today, we have no spell that lessens loss. A neighbor's backhoe beeps as it excavates a slope. Sifting your words, I dig at the site where pines scent after rain. A black swallowtail lands on Russian sage, bending the stalk. As it imbibes nectar and sways, I sway. Light slants all that we do. One more translation and poem, and then I'll open it back up to Kimiko. This next translation is a poem by the poet Li Bai, and it's called Drinking Alone with the Moon. And I learned my craft as a poet by turning to translating ancient Chinese poetry. I didn't go to graduate school. When I was at UC Berkeley, I was obsessed with trying to translate these ancient poems into English to bring them alive. And I remember one day looking at a translation of this poem by Arthur Waley, who was the, I believe, curator at the British Museum, a world-renowned expert. And in this poem, there are 3 characters. There's the speaker who drinks wine, the moon, and then he turns to his own shadow who has his own sort of life. And Arthur Waley translated the moon as a friend. And I remember being shocked decades ago to read Waley translating the phrase about the body, my slave, the body. And I was like aghast, and I thought, how does the master-slave relationship get into Li Bai drinking with the moon and seeing his own shadow? They're really treated non-hierarchically, and part of the beauty of the poem is the shadow has its own existence, and they separate, and there's this wish to meet in the far Milky Way. So one of the things that led me to translation was thinking, I want to be able to write translations, but in a voice that's immediate and to counteract some of the overlays that have been put there by previous translators. Drinking alone with the moon. Among the flowers with a jug of wine, I pour alone, lacking companions, and raising cup, invite the bright moon. Facing my shadow makes 3 people, but the moon is unable to drink, and my shadow just follows my body. For a time, the moon leads the shadow. Be joyous as long as it's spring. I sing, and the moon wavers. I dance, and the shadow stumbles. When sober, we were intimate friends. Now drunk, each of us separates. May we be bound and travel without anxieties. May we meet in the far Milky Way. It was really a pleasure to translate this poem by Levi into English, and one of the things I loved about translating it was to think about the structures of poems. I would write out the characters, stroke by stroke, character by character, so that I wasn't just reading off the page. I was writing them out by hand to personalize it, to feel it in my body. And then I was thinking about how did Levi choose the next character, and how would that look in my own awkward handwriting. But it was a way to deepen my experience of the poem. And it seems to me translation can do that. We live in such a fast, surface-oriented world. Poetry makes us slow down and deepen. And in writing, in creating translations, it's really the deepest form of reading, I think, because you read again and again and think how the poem is constructed to create the experience that's there. And I love how it starts with a jug of wine, something really small, and it ends really large with the Milky Way. And this is maybe 40 years after I translated that poem. I was working on my own poem with one-liners. I like to call them monostichs. Each line is like a microcosm. And I was searching for a way to end it, and the Levi poem came back to me. Transpirations. Leafing branches of a backyard plum. Branches of water on a dissolving ice sheet. Chatter of magpies when you approach. Lilacs lean over the road, weighted with purple blossoms. Then the noon sun shimmers the grasses. You ride the surge into summer. Smell of pinon crackling in the fireplace. Blued notes of a saxophone in the air. Not by sand running through an hourglass, but by our bodies igniting. Passing in the form of vapors from a living body. This world of orange sunlight and wildfire haze. World of iron filings pulled toward magnetic south and north. Pool of quicksilver when you bend to tie your shoes. Standing, you well up with glistening eyes. Have you lived with utmost care? Have you articulated emotions like the edges of leaves? Adjusting your breath to the seasonal rhythm of grasses, gazing into a lake on a salt flat, and drinking in reflection the Milky Way. So 40 years later, that ending to the Levi poem came back to me.
I love the way your poetry talks back or has a conversation with your translations, and that it both honors the original, it gives homage to the original and to writers in the past, but also is very forward-looking, right? So actually, we kind of planned what we were going to say, but it strikes me, we were talking about one-lined poems this afternoon with some graduate students, and the monostichs, and how you and I both see those in the Japanese haiku and tanka, because they're originally written as one lines. The haiku wasn't written as 3 little lines. It was written as one line. And so when you look at Arthur's poem that he just read, you have these long lines. So each line is like an individual poem, and then together it creates this field of energy, a meadow of energy, and it's gorgeous. So there's a looking back, acknowledging, quoting, but then there's a real forward motion to what you're doing, and that's I love that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about haiku, actually. I used to call it the poor abused haiku because I didn't feel that Americans translated haiku very well. I think that's changed now with the more people translate and understand that the Japanese language, and I'm not a translator, by the way, I'm not bilingual, but I do know the way the Japanese language has and values words with multiple meanings, right? So in the space of 17-syllable haiku, the poem is constantly exploding, because you'll come up against a word, not come up against, but you'll come up to a word, pine, that is a pine tree, I mean in English, pine tree, and also pining. So it's constantly exploding like that. And I think there's more recognition that that's going on. So a crib is a transliteration, a line, a word-for-word translation, and that is what I use, because my Japanese is long gone. Basho, master haiku poet, his dates are 1644, 1694. So you think Shakespeare died in 1616, so he came a little bit after Shakespeare, just to give context. So when I try my hand at translation, I use a transliteration, a crib, so word-for-word setup. Here's the Japanese, poorly read. Yamaji kite nani yara yukashi sumire gusa. The transliteration, mountain path walking, somehow, for some reason, curious, eager to know, charming, and then a type of violet flower. So this is about the 11th draft, which isn't not that many drafts, actually. Walking the mountain path, I am curiously taken by a purple flower. So I wanted that word taken to be a kind of pivot. So you're taking, but the flower is taking you, right? So that moves it forward. So I also, similar to Arthur, like to use other poetry as writing prompts. There is a wonderful form, a new form, called the golden shovel. It was invented by contemporary poet Terence Hayes, and basically, I promise I'm not going to lecture. Basically, a golden shovel takes a line or a poem, and every word from that line or poem appears at the end of each line. It's easier to hear than hear my explanation. So for this particular Basho haiku, I'll read it again. It's a little different. This must be draft number 12. Walking the mountain, I am curiously taken by a purple flower. And here's my golden shovel. I carry a flashlight when walking in the musty basement, the dark, suddenly lit like a mountain in sun, crevice, and path. I want to descend into shadow and am curiously wanting. When was I last taken? When did he lead me by fingertips to a dusky room, a glow across white linen? The purple shadow is deeper than that little flower. A good friend of mine, the translator Hiroaki Sato, is as I said, he's a friend of mine. And so I asked him if I could use some of his translations for my golden shovels. And he said, sure, Kimiko, do whatever you want. I'm like, okay. So I use his translations all the time. And I give him credit. So his translation of the poet Tada Chimako is, inside my body, death is a soft, wintry wart. So I've written 2 golden shovels with this haiku. On my stomach, I slip inside the snow fort packed as my hideaway. On my back, my body is one with the ice. Death is never near, I think, I thought. Is death near a 7-year-old's soft reluctance to leave the wintry pleasure of worrying a wart? Though unseeable, we assume the inside, tissue, blood, and bone up here in my mind, the piss and shit before the body evacuates. But also lodged is one's death in some form, unless expiring is unforeseen, like my mother's, a crashing metal against metal, her soft self crushed on that wintry parkway. Did the paramedic notice her wart? I wouldn't have landed there had it not been for the haiku by Tada Chimako. As some of you know, I've been working for many years on a Japanese genre. We oftentimes call it a form, but it's a genre. It's called the Zui Hitsu. And there is no equivalent in Western literature. It's not a poem, it's not poetry or prose. It's its own genre. And the cult classic, Beats loved this book, by the way, is the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon, written around the year 1000. And so I've been writing my versions of the of Zuihitsu, sometimes taking it a little far off course, as is my want. And in the past couple years, I've been working on an anthology of Zuihitsu, which starts with classical Japanese versions and then has translations of modern and contemporary Japanese. And then we have about 40, 45 Zuihitsu by American writers. So we had a very interesting conversation about Zuihitsu. Mm-hmm. I had the nerve to when my co-editor Dana Isakawa and I received Arthur's Zuihitsu, I said, you know, this is really beautiful, but I don't know if it's a Zuihitsu. So I played around with it, and that's part of what I feel I'm doing in putting this anthology together, is introducing a form. but the form has no description. I mean, if you want to write a sonnet, you can find a description of how to write a sonnet, but there's no description of zuihitsu. You have to read them, and I can only read them in English, and then intuit and see what a zuihitsu is and what it's become. So I embarked on a correspondence with Arthur about his version of the zuihitsu. And we came to a understanding. Do you want to read your original?
Sure. Let's see.
Is this your original?
Yes. Before I read the zuihitsu, I just wanted Kimiko to respond to your beautiful haiku, and it struck me immediately. I don't know any Japanese, but hearing you read the Japanese and then the transliteration, it fascinated me to see how many more words it took in English to convey what was happening that is clearly like a glimpse of what's happening in the Japanese. So to me, it was like this expansion or unfolding. And I love how in the basho it ends on the image with the purple flower. And though you've got that in your golden shovel, you've created a whole human drama that then leads into the purple flower. So the way you handle it is beautifully. You've taken it and you've sort of seized it. Yeah. So this is the first version I sent to Kimiko, and it's threaded through my book Into the Hush, and there's no title to it, but it goes back and forth. So here it is, Zuihitsu. Hoo, hoo. An owl in the tallest blue spruce. Before sunrise, patches of ice in the driveway. Facing each other, we held a single brush in the air with our right hands. I, left-handed, felt awkward holding it. But holding it higher up, he beckoned me to start. A melody played on the piano with 5 black keys. I heard it, walking across packed snow and ice with micro spikes under my shoes. I tried to bring the brush down onto the white paper, but he kept it an inch above, white out. Then we pressed it down and lifting, completed a dot. Full moon, dogs barking, racing up and down the glassed-in hallway. Xenon, krypton, argon, neon, helium, inert gases, blue bottles on branches. Nothing's inert. Where am I? Moving the brush in the air, we made a downward stroke, then, releasing pressure, brought it up. I drew a deep breath. In the beginning, I liked the sounds of metempsychosis, jazz, cooler, and did not know that words would guide me under the bluest sky to where a single wedge of geese caught the low sunlight with wings to you. We leaned the brush horizontally below the dot. When we reached the corner, clink, we sipped champagne out of hand-blown Venetian glass flutes, spread black caviar on blinis, glimmering ice, glimmering water, dot, months of dots, years, dragons, ink smeared, splattered on rice paper with a cap. Ha! Dragon after dragon in mist and roiling water. I tried to angle it downward to the left, but resisting the motion that was supposed to be a continuation of a single stroke, he paused. Tennis players ran left and right, hitting forehands, backhands. As one player raced up to the net, the other lobbed around earth. 35,000 pieces of shrapnel larger than a tennis ball circled at 7,500 miles per hour. Angling the brush down, we completed roof. Added 2 dots, then below swung it horizontally from left to right, lifting. Hiking a trail along the Nepali coast, or bodies, brushes, we stopped at Hanakapi Beach and swam out beyond the breakers. Later, we learned of 20 drownings. We brought it vertically down below the horizontal line, ran it from left to right, then I gasped at emptiness. So that was the version I sent Kimiko. And then we had some correspondence.
So with this anthology, I'm trying to course correct a little bit. Because there's no description, there's no definition of what a zuihitsu is. So I felt, and if you could see what he was reading, it's a piece with it looks like line breaks, and it looks very intentional in terms of where he has possibly line breaks and certainly stanza breaks. So they look like stanzas, they don't look like paragraphs. So I don't think of zuihitsu unless it has poetry and prose in it. I don't think of it as looking like a poem. So I thought, this is not a zuihitsu, it looks like a poem. So that began a correspondence of what zuihitsu is, or what it might be. And I messed with his piece, and I even took part of his correspondence to me. One of the hallmarks of a zuihitsu is it feels very spontaneous. It feels casual. And so what he read, there's some feeling of spontaneity in what he just read, but there's still a feeling that it's very intentional. And for me, it was missing that casual sort of just kind of blurting things out almost. So I did find that in our correspondence. So after going back and forth a number of times, I suggested he take part of his poem with the line break, part of his zuihitsu with the line breaks out, so it gave it some room and it didn't look like a poem. It didn't sound like a poem because it didn't have those breaks in it. And then also bring into that part of his correspondence. So it now has this much different quality. Would you
Sure.
read this number 3?
So the final one?
Yeah.
So let me just say that I don't read Japanese, but in Japanese, the zuihitsu is composed of 2 Chinese characters, kanji, and the 2 characters mean follow or following the brush. So that became part of this rewrite as we're sharing the process. And I think I titled this One-Minded Calligraphy. Yeah. So the title switched from zuihitsu to One-Minded Calligraphy, where obviously 2 people holding one brush have to work in unison with where the brush stops and starts and how it moves. So here it is, One-Minded Calligraphy. Since the kanji for zuihitsu means follow or following the brush, I suddenly recollected the one time I met and had dinner with the renowned calligrapher and translator of Dogen into English, Moon in a Dewdrop from North Point Press, Kazuaki Tanahashi. A mutual friend, Morgan Thomas, invited us to dinner in Santa Fe, and after dinner, Kaz said to me we needed to do one-minded calligraphy. I said, "What's that?" He explained that in one-minded calligraphy, two people hold one brush and have to harmonize their minds and bodies to create one character in unison. Facing each other, we held a single brush in the air with our right hands. I, left-handed, felt awkward holding it. But holding it higher up, he beckoned me to start. I tried to bring the brush down onto the white paper, but he kept it an inch above, white out. Then we pressed it down and lifting, completed a dot. Moving the brush in the air, we made another downward stroke, then, releasing pressure, brought it up. I drew a deep breath. We leaned the brush horizontally below the dot. When we reached the corner, I tried to angle it downward to the left, but resisting the motion that was supposed to be a continuation of a single stroke, he paused. Angling the brush down, we completed roof, added 2 dots, then below, swung it horizontally from left to right. Lifting, we brought it vertically down below the horizontal line, ran it from left to right. Then I gasped at emptiness. Very different.
Very different, very different. So you can see how the first Zuihitsu, the first piece, is beautiful. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, right? It's a beautiful piece. But for me, the feeling was that, as I said earlier, it was more intentional. It didn't feel as casual as I expect a Zuihitsu to have. So I wanted to undo that a little bit. And in the original, he has at least 2 threads braided together or twisted together. 2 can't be braided, so at least 2 twisted together. And I took one of those threads, tried putting it into a paragraph, which automatically gives it a feeling of casualness and less intentionality. And then I added the very casual correspondence, right? So, and there was a jump in between the tone, between the correspondence and the description. And that's very like a Zuihitsu too. So you have things that don't feel logical. It doesn't feel rational. Anything you learned about how to write an essay in freshman comp, you do not do in Zuihitsu. That's how I teach it. We go over the lessons in essay writing, and then I say, do not do any of these things. So it was very interesting coming at it from a different angle, that he had this beautiful work, and it could be that as the Zuihitsu evolves in the United States, that it will take on more of the shape and tone of poetry. I don't know. But for my project, I wanted something that was a little course-corrected. And we never actually talked about how you felt about how I was messing with your work. You can complain now.
I haven't decided if I prefer one or the other. They're so radically different. For the purposes of my book, Into the Hush, the Zuihitsu is spread without commentary, so that it's a through line through the book. So they're individual poems, but I like how these interludes change the relationship between the poems. And then there's a kind of mystery, and then when the 2 characters complete emptiness, then the book has like this fullness. But in terms of Zuihitsu, I understand that I like that sort of the background sets a kind of a grounding that is more, not so much accessible, but maybe traditional, in the sense that it provides some important context in which to sort of experience what happens. And I could be making a jump here. I know this seems like we're going far from translation, so I'm making an aside. But it seems to me there's the issue when you're translating of taking the text and thinking, how can you render that into another language with immediacy and force and the kind of urgency of voice that commands attention. And at the same time, I think translation work, because it's obviously so fertile, becomes like a source of excavation, of discovery, of renewal and transformation. And that's what's happening in a way with the Zuihitsu here in your project. I'm jumping, but I'd like to think that with the ghazals, an Arabic form of poetry, people started just playing fast and loose with the rules. And I remember one American poet saying to me, Arthur, you can write any ghazal, just couplets, and they're all disjunctive. They don't just leap and go anywhere. And so I thought, oh, okay. And then it was like Aga Shahid Ali said, wait a minute, American poets, you've got it all wrong. There's structure, there's a rhyme, there's a signature of the author in the end. There's a rigor behind the language. And I feel like maybe you've been, one of the foremost promoters of Zuihitsu into English, and there's a sense of sort of like anything goes, and now it's sort of time to like look at the root, look at what the rigor is behind this form. Even though it's haphazard, there is a kind of pressure moving the language into the shape that needs to be there. So for me, it's really exciting, and I don't know that I can choose one or the other. They're sort of so different. I'm sort of like oranges and apples, letting them be in the air. Do you want to read a? I think you have.
Yeah. So, sorry, I have too many papers here.
What about
Okay. So, things that are requisite. A potato masher. Safety pins in a sewing box. English 210 before English 304. Thank you notes, although I am so miserable at tending to them that it's one of my few regrets, wishing I had written them after my first wedding, and second and third. M has introduced the term oppositional defiance, and there is something of that in my procrastination and not doing. Get well cards, too. Nicole has gotten me into the habit of sending condolences. Speaking more than one language, although the truth is my Japanese is pretty miserable, French and Spanish, too. And now, depending on where I am or what I'm up to, I confuse Japanese and Spanish. I think January, enero, ban on assault rifles. Hammer and nails, a dustpan, a cheap glass vase, though, well, I guess if it's cheap, it should be a cheap glass vase, though a glass bottle will do.
Beautiful.
That's it. So we've talked about translating. We've talked about translating even though one doesn't actually speak the other language, in my case. I'm not fluent, I'm not bilingual. We've talked also about using what we've gained from translation for our other creative endeavors, and also how people translate culturally ideas and forms, and the difficulty of that, and the pleasure of that too. Would you like to read one more thing in closing?
Sure. Maybe I'll come back to another translation and poem. So I'm coming back to Tang Dynasty, to a poem by Du Fu. Someone earlier today was asking how to work with musicality, and one of the things immediately as a translator is loss, right? The sounds. Chinese is a tonal language. Classical poems were traditionally chanted. That is all gone. But rather than just sort of dwell in loss or think whatever I write is going to be tradutor, translator, trader, one thinks, how can I work with original material? And in this particular Du Fu poem, which I love, it's written in 757 Common Era. It's written at a period of civil war, and Du Fu was held in Chang'an, in the capital city, separated from his wife and children. And this poem is a reunion when he comes and sees his wife and children again, but there's also this sense of alienation, like he's been gone for so long. What's present and what's absent are really important. And I remember looking at this poem, thinking about, every poem is untranslatable, right? But looking at the first 5 characters, the first 2 characters in Chinese had the mountain radical, and it was literally shaggy, craggy. And again, in a 5-character line, you have 2 characters, a pause, and then 3. So it's like shaggy, craggy, what, right? There's that space. And then it's clouds in the west. And at first I tried like doing shaggy, craggy, red clouds in the west. And then I thought, there are too many adjectives. That doesn't work. I've got to make it lean. And then toward the end, there are a lot of S sounds in the Chinese. And I thought, I can use that. I can take my words in English. An American reader might not know that that's happening in the Chinese, but I can work with those S sounds toward the end. So these are sort of, some of these choices are laid in to this translation. Return to Zhang Village. Oh, and one word, li, which is a distance measure in China. The li is about 1/3 the distance of a Western mile, which I chose to leave as li and not do 1,000 miles. That just seemed too generic to me in English. Return to Zhang Village. Shaggy red clouds in the west. The sun's foot is down to level earth. By the wicker gate, sparrows are chirping. The traveler returns from over 1,000 li. Wife and children panic at my presence. Quieted, they still wipe tears. In this age of turmoil, I floated and meandered, a miracle of chance to return alive. Neighbors crowd the fence tops and also sigh and sob. In the deep night, we are again holding candles, facing each other as in a dream. You stop there? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you, everyone. And we're going to go out back in the hallway there, and we're going to, there'll be book sales and a signing, and then up one flight in the rotunda, there'll be a reception. So I hope you join us for one or both. On the second floor.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.